Hello everyone, this is Nishant Malhotra, Sole Founder of the Middle Road, global thought leader platform enabling social change and impact, specifically within the media and e-learning section. It's focused a lot on sustainable development sector. Today, I'm very glad to introduce Mr. Alfredo Quarto, Program and Policy Director and co-founder of Mangrove Action Project, a thought leader US-based nonprofit enabling social change and impact by conserving and restoring our world's mangrove forests. There's also a piece on this which I've published, and there'll be much more material coming on this topic. Mr. Wilfredo, welcome to the platform.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Mangroves are critical pillars of our Mother Earth's ecosystem, preserving the biodiversity, storing more carbon than any other forest type per hectare, providing a sustainable livelihood for coastal communities and a bulwark against storms. When we first talk, I want to first congratulate you for your fantastic work in preserving mangroves globally. You're one of the biggest initiatives in this space, and also I feel in biodiversity. Now, how did this idea about preserving and nurturing mangroves and coastal habitats originate?
Well, I was traveling in Thailand at the time and met a man named Ian Baird who worked with Earth Island Institute. And I was going to do a photojournalism story on an environmental issue. He said, "Do you know about the mangroves and shrimp farming?" And so I said, "No, I don't know anything about that." And I didn't really understand what it was about. But he took me down to southern Thailand on the Andaman Sea and showed me the shrimp farms and the mangroves that were being cut down for shrimp farming. And he said the people here are really suffering because they're losing their mangrove forest. He said it's very important for the local people. The communities depend on fishing, depend on the mangroves for medicines and for wood and so on. So it was really important for the people living in the coast to have mangroves healthy and preserved. But they're being cut down really rapidly by shrimp farm expansions. And I'm not sure if you know about shrimp aquaculture, but it's a very big industry worldwide. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. At that time, in 1992, when we first started, I didn't know anything about mangroves, but I learned very quickly about the importance of mangroves to the local people and the problem of shrimp farm developing. So we decided to form a network, a global network, to address the problem, because the similar issues were happening in Malaysia, India, other parts of the world, Bangladesh, and so on, and then also in Latin America and even in Africa. So we realized that a global network was needed to try to address this, and we started forming Mangrove Action Project in 1992, almost 30 years ago.
But there's something extraordinary which you're doing. You're educating coastal communities on many aspects of mangroves. Pretty significantly, one of them is positive externality. You're trying to, see a lot of benefits coming out in terms of beehive, which helps in processing honey and honey-based products. Now, to talk about a splendid work, you talked about Thailand, you talked about Sri Lanka and other countries, specifically through the community-based ecological mangrove restoration technique. That is something how you're building the community. It's more of a community-based building model to the CBEMR. How does it work?
Well, we found that most restoration projects around the world were failing. They were failing because of lack of understanding of the ecology of the mangroves. And most people in the communities who were basically hired or volunteered to do planting by hand, we call it gardening, mangroves, were not aware that their efforts were going to fail. But if you go back to those same places that were planted by hand in neat rows, in mud flats, or even seagrass beds and other places that were not suitable, the local people were being disappointed grandly because they could not see any success. A lot of the mangroves they planted died. So we wanted to try to come up with a method that would work in restoring the mangroves successfully. And we came up with a community-managed basic project called CBEMR, which is Community-Based Ecological Mangrove Restoration. And that means using the ecology of the mangroves to help restore the mangroves, using the natural process of restoration rather than planting by hand, which did not work. What we do is we restore the hydrology and the terrain so the mangroves can come back on their own with seedlings that float on the water from the tides and come in and plant themselves. And you have more biodiversity this way. Most of the plantings done by hand or plantation type of plantings, it's only one variety of mangrove that's planted. And that one variety is usually the rhizophora or the red mangrove. Only that one, because it's more easier to plant what's called the propagules or the seedlings in the ground. But the problem is the ease of planting was not working. And so 75 to 80% of the attempts worldwide were failing. And we saw this as a real waste of time and effort and also opportunity, because we really need the mangroves again to be restored and conserved properly if we're going to help fight climate change, for one. So that's why we try to endorse that method and promote this as a best practices method of mangrove restoration.
Maybe go a bit deep in hydrology technology, which you talked about. Why do you think it's so important? I know it makes the coastal line very even, and anything more than that particular advantage?
Well, for one thing, mangroves grow in mangrove zones. They're in a special zone. They don't grow in mudflats. Mudflats is a whole other ecosystem. So the hydrology of the mangrove is very important. They need fresh water as much as they need the brackish water from the ocean. So mangroves cannot live in salt water alone. If it's just pure seawater, they'll die. It's too saline. But they can handle brackish water, which is part fresh water and part seawater. And they mix the two together to form brackish water. And they need the nutrients also come from upland as well. So a lot of times the developments that happen upland, like shrimp farms or highways or hotels, block the fresh waterway. And sometimes dams or other people using for irrigation take away the fresh water. So the mangroves do not do very well if they don't have the freshwater connection. They really need that to survive. They can handle some salt. They can handle up to a certain amount of percentage of salt, but they can't handle pure seawater. They'll die. And so I've seen worldwide problems of people trying to plant mangroves in a too low a zone. It's too low into the ocean where the tide comes up and they'll drown the mangroves, where the tides are too strong and they'll take the mangrove seedlings away and they'll be washed away. So we've seen this happen time and again, and we're trying to say we have to restore the hydrology, which is the upstream freshwater connections, as well as the incoming tidal connections, if you're going to have a successful mangrove restoration. It's not like upland where you can plant a tree, like an apple tree or a pine tree or whatever upland. It won't work for mangroves because mangroves need certain conditions. They're more complex. And most people that do mangrove plantings are foresters who have learned upland forestry. They've learned how to plant forest upland. They usually plant a Doug fir, for instance, in the US or in some other country, a eucalyptus, say. But those trees are introduced and they're not natural. But to try to restore the natural ecosystem is what we're trying to do with mangroves as well. And it's very important for the biodiversity depends on a diverse mangrove forest, not just one type of tree. And that's the problem. And we see this worldwide, this problem comes up and over again, with people trying to plant one mangrove only, the Rhizophora or the red mangroves. And that's not a good way to go.
When you implemented all these initiatives, there must have been a resistance because you were trying to change the whole mindset of the people around. Now, what sort of resistance and how did you make that turn into acceptance among the communities focusing on and the long-term benefits, like but externalities and beehives and honey products, it takes a bit of time and a lot of convincing to do.
Sure.
One could be like, increasing their income, that would giving alternative sources of livelihood. So those would be the initiatives which go in depth of how measures you take.
The local people have to understand that they can manage the mangrove because it's in their area. They're there all the time. They're right there in the mangrove areas. Government officials will come and visit the mangrove area, but they don't live there. Oftentimes, local communities know more about the mangroves than we do. They live with the mangroves all their lives, so they know what they need to do to preserve their mangroves, conserve them. And they see the benefits directly in more fish to catch, more fuel wood and medicines to get from the mangroves, more like honey collection can happen in the mangrove areas. The more healthy the mangrove is, the more honey they get, the more fish they get. So the benefits for the local people are really obvious. And when they see they can manage it and have some control over those resources through, say, a 10-year resource tenure, they can actually see the benefits of them managing it sustainably. One of the problems we have in the world today is most local communities don't have access to the management responsibilities or management, privileges. They're not given the privilege to manage their mangroves. They're not given that responsibility by the government. Oftentimes it's in the government hands only, and the government has professional foresters or others that come in and lease the land from the government. So that lack of control of their own resources is one of the problems that local communities face. And it's one of the reasons also for local communities, when they lose that ability to manage their own resource, they also lose the incentive to manage it. And oftentimes they'll cut the mangroves themselves and unsustainably manage the mangroves, because for them, it's better to get the profits now than to see their neighbor get it or some stranger coming in and taking the benefits of the mangroves. So that competition with the outside world is what's causing oftentimes the local communities not to properly manage their resource. We're trying to hopefully get them that management privilege and that management skill that they can then use to conserve and manage over the long term. And honey collection is one thing they can do. We've done that successfully in Thailand, for instance, in Nanang province, or Nanang village, I should say. They've actually produced a lot of honey from the mangroves. They're teaching other communities around them about honey production. And so the honey bees of the mangrove areas are prolific in making a really nice honey. They can sell it to the local hotels, or they can sell it in the villages and so on. And so they make a profit that way. And it's a good alternative industry for them. There are other industries as well, like raising oysters or mussels and things with the mangroves. You can raise shellfish, for instance, or even some fish in the mangrove area, small scale. They can make a profit, basically a partial livelihood that way. But then the fishermen, when they go to sea, get more fish closer to home. They have to go further to sea when there's no mangroves around, which is more dangerous for them. The more distance you go from the coast, the more time you spend away from your family, and the more danger it is of storms and so on. So it's really to the benefit of the local community to have the mangroves. And as well, they protect against tsunamis and hurricanes and surges, wave surges, basically storm surges, which is a big problem for the local communities these days, even more so because of the climate change.
And did you see any differences between different countries? Was some of the things might be just very uniform, and some of them could be a bit different?
There's differences. Well, there's some differences between countries for sure, cultures and so on. But overall, the issue's kind of the same, because people that live in the mangrove areas benefit from them. And one of the big problems worldwide we see is the government not allowing the local communities the access to the rights to manage their own resources sustainably. And oftentimes the community management process, which is age old, oftentimes thousands of years old, these communities have been in those areas managing their resource. When that right is taken away from them and given to someone else, like a government official or a private landowner who leases the land, oftentimes the local community loses the ability to manage it, and they don't manage it properly too. So we really need to see that as a common problem worldwide, that we need to work with local communities to help them develop their management skills and also have the rights to manage. That's really have the right to manage.
See did you do an impact analysis to see how, all the management practices which you're imparting, how is it going, within the different countries? How's been the perception and how's been the effect?
Well, it's an uphill battle, trying to, for one, to convince the government that owns the land oftentimes to let us do this. And the community has to be empowered oftentimes because they don't have the power to do this. So oftentimes they'll try to do something that's taken away from them. The government will send in somebody to say, you're not doing this right. And basically, we have to give the government and the local community to work together. We have to get them to work together and to understand that the best management practices are with that kind of co-cooperation, not just one side only, but when the government allows the community and the community allows the government to work with them in a process long standing and will go into the future properly. I think that's very important.
True. Yeah, that's maybe over a long period of time. Not only that's very helpful, but there could be a lot of distrust which goes off, and that's what's very important when they work together and see what are the limitations and what are the positives you're coming, and the outcome is really positive. Climate change as the central global agenda among all the actors within the sustainable development sector. Do you think the future of mangroves will work out within, because the Euro taxonomy which is coming out too has very specifically going to be including, from what I know, biodiversity. Now it's going to become a major theme within the climate change. And what do you think it's going to be repercussions worldwide? There'll be a lot of equity or a lot of investments coming in from a lot of ESG sectors, or it could become much more mainstream than what it is.
Sure. When we first started in 1982, I want to mention this kind of interesting fact. Mangroves were oftentimes called wastelands. They're called useless wastelands. And so governments would encourage people to shrimp farm or build hotels. In Ecuador, actually, you have land taken away from you if you did not turn it into a shrimp farm or other money-making process. So mangroves are not valued very high. I think it was worth about $740 per hectare in mangrove use, where shrimp farming is worth $2,000 some dollars per hectare. So shrimp farming is worth a lot more at that time. But now mangroves are worth $30,000 to $100,000 per hectare because of the climate change issues, because of sea level rise, damage from hurricanes, and so on. They now see mangroves as really valuable. And so mangroves are taking on a new whole issue that people weren't aware of before, which is really encouraging to see finally. But it took a long time to get there. You know, the evaluation of mangroves was so low for many, many years. It was very hard to convince governments or industries to not destroy the mangroves. But today, with climate change, we see things like carbon credit schemes, to help come up with valuation of the mangrove. Also, there's a lot more efforts now to recognize mangroves as a living buffer against tsunamis or hurricanes, against erosion, which is happening because of climate change and sea level rise. And the increasing frequency of storms and their intensity is really causing a lot of people to look at mangroves now as a really important factor to include now in any management plan for the coast. So I think these things are coming together now and convincing a lot more people, including governments and industries, that we need to protect the mangroves and restore them. We're seeing a lot more positive energy. And also, when I first started in 1982, no one knew about what mangroves were even hardly. They were very unknown. Most of the world did not know them unless you lived in the mangrove areas. So we really have found it very difficult to convince people to save the mangroves, because we first had to describe what they were. And that was very hard. Most people did not know what they were. They just thought, well, these mangroves are, they call them mangoes sometimes. I thought I was saving the mangoes. It's pretty strange. I said, I'm not saving mango. I like mangoes, but I'm not saving them. But the mangroves were really unknown to many people. And so they were looked at as a nuisance. They were looked at as a muddy swampland, mosquito infested. And all these interesting facts come with a knowledge of what mangroves really are and how important they are. They're a wetland, they're coastal forests, but they also produce a lot of other benefits, and a huge number of resources are in the mangrove areas that we need to protect, including the biodiversity, which we really want to protect too. And then with sea level rise, mangroves play a very important part now with protecting against the problems of sea level, because it's eroding a lot of coastlines. And some of the island countries, unfortunately, are going to go under water if they don't have a slowdown in the sea level rise. This is very unfortunate. There'll be a huge number of what we call ecological refugees in the future if we don't do something about the climate change issues. It's really important to understand this. Millions of people will be displaced. Some of them have nowhere at home to go, so they'll have to be actually moving to other countries to survive, because their islands will be underwater. This is a sad fact, and we cannot hope to stop this if we don't do anything about the climate change and the production of fossil fuels and pollutants. This is very important. It's very discouraging for me as an environmentalist to see how much knowledge there is today, and yet we're still reluctant to act in a manner that's effective to stop climate change or to slow it down at least. They're still talking even today about a 2.7 degrees Celsius rise in temperature by the end of the century, I guess, which is going to be way beyond what the limits are for controlling climate change, way beyond. So we're heavily invested in earning money today, but losing our future tomorrow, losing it for the future generations who will suffer the consequences of our inertia. Basically, I look at it as foolishness. There's no other way around it. Very short-sightedness.
Talked about Ecuador. Latin America is like one of the most beautiful, very picturesque. Do you think a lot of work is now being done? I think something was being done in countries, other countries also. There's actually an uptake in protecting. I heard like there's a huge, there's this huge drive to save Amazon rainforest. So things are happening around the world. I mean, there's a huge awareness. You feel there's a lot of positivity coming in?
Yes, there's more people aware, like the Amazon rainforest, for instance, but we're still losing it. We're still losing the Amazon rainforest today. They're still setting it afire. Indonesia is still burning its mangrove and other forests there to make production for palm oil. Palm oil is so important today. It's not really important. We could do without palm oil, but the industry is making money for a few people to make money, and they're willing to destroy the planet we live on in order to make that money. It's really sad. I mean, how can we survive on money if we have no food to eat, no water to drink, and no future to really look forward to. The very air we breathe is becoming contaminated. The very water we drink is full of plastic now. It's just insane. We're starting to see more and more evidence that we're destroying our own planet, our own living system. And you have people like Elon Musk who wants to fly to Mars to settle there. We're leaving the planet that's healthy and biodiverse to go to a dead planet, Mars, and settle on Mars. And Elon Musk could spend billions of dollars if he wanted to help climate change issues, if he wanted to save the planet we live on. Instead of spending billions of dollars to go to outer space, which I personally am, I'm a personal involvement in that issue because I was an aerospace engineer in my past life. Basically I worked for Boeing for about 3.5 years. I studied aeronautical and astronautical engineering. But I realized as I got out of school, it was not making the earth a better place. And a lot of problems exist. I figured I better become an environmentalist and in a sense, environmental engineer in a way, trying to help save the planet. And that's what we have to do today. More people need to get involved in this effort. We know that somebody like Greta Thunberg in Sweden is doing great work as a young person, but the younger generation is facing a terrible future. And I have 2 children. I worry about them and worry about their future. And this is something I try to talk to them about. But I know that we need to act today if they're going to have a future tomorrow. This is very important to us to understand.
Sweden, Nordic countries are doing fantastic. Even France is taking leadership. Switzerland, Europe is deeply involved. They're trying to do work out. I think a lot of other countries also. China is also doing a lot of things. It's whatever it can. It's doing it. India's got some of the targets coming in. So I think there's a global. I was reading even Mexico. A lot of money is coming into this particular sector. So that there's an awareness, and you're right, we need to work a lot more harder, and we need to save this planet going forward. I think that come to your vision, and it's good you talked about engineering, which I was actually supposed to ask you. Now, building on that question, you talked about your term, but how's the transition, which you say, the space industry, which you are into the nature? You're coming out with, I will say, nature-based solutions, and how has been that journey? Would you like to people to know?
Yeah, well, I studied engineering, and one of the things engineers are supposed to do is work with science to help come up with solutions to problems. And in a sense, I'm doing that now with the environmental work I do. And we've come up with a solution, which is called the community-based ecological mangrove restoration, as a solution to the problem of mangrove loss and restoration. And rather than see continuing failures of restoration, we're encouraging other people to get involved in our CBEMR as what we call a best practice approach. And that involves an ecological approach. It involves working with nature, not against nature. It involves also respecting nature, because you have to understand nature has done things for millions of years, billions of years actually, to try to create what we have today in life. And in a short time, people are trying to come up with their own solutions that they developed after 10 years or 5 years, solutions to try to make nature work with their solutions, rather than try to make our solutions work with nature. So we really need to change our focus on this planet and learn to live with the planet. Native people here in the US, Native Americans, Native people all over the world have a stronger connection to nature and to the basic natural facts of life than we have in the modern society. We've lost that connection. We have our computers, we have our cell phones. People are not connected today to the very ground they walk on, the very air they breathe, the food they eat. We need to reconnect again. That's one thing we have to learn to do. I heard when COVID happened, one of the first things that happened is people stopped driving. And a lot of people were not going anywhere because of lack of travel, So less airplanes, less automobile travel. And the skies cleared in places that hadn't seen stars for years. People saw the stars. What kind of system do we have where we can't even look at the sky? I live in the country, and I live in a farm here. So I see the stars every night very clearly. But if you're living in the city, oftentimes the lights of the city or the pollution is so strong, you won't see those stars. We need to reconnect to be able to see the stars, feel the planet's warm air, cold air, water flow, rainfall. We need to reconnect with everything we have and take it not for granted. We cannot take for granted that we always will have these things. We will not have them if we don't take care of them. And one of the things people have to understand, we're not here to own the planet. We're here to steward the planet. And a steward is different than an owner. That's very important. You can own a house, you can own a piece of land, possibly. You're supposed to steward that place and leave it for other generations to follow. And so we're not doing a very good job of that right now. Maybe we never have, but I think we need to learn how to do that if we're going to survive.
You're absolutely right. We have for years, if you look at the evolution of humans from Homo sapiens, which is what predominantly we are, we've all our thousands and millions of years we've lived with nature, and with nature gone, that's why we're encountering so many problems, and it is so much ingrained within us. We don't understand that we cannot exist without nature, and that's what whenever I've thought about it, and started reading about the evolution of humans. That's when I realized that how important this particular subject is.
I was in Maldives recently, 2 years ago, and before the COVID happened. And I remember saying at a conference I was giving a presentation. I said, off the top of my head, I just came up with this idea that human nature needs nature. And the person who was translating for me, Ume, turned to me and said, "That's really a great quote." And I didn't even think about it. I said, it's very simple. It's very matter of fact. But human nature needs nature. I said the same quote to the Washington Post newspaper here in the US, and they quoted me on that, and it was in the newspaper. I thought it's kind of interesting. That obviously is a good quote. So I think human nature needs nature. We need to think about that. We're too distant, and now Elon Musk and his friends are all going off to outer space and leaving their connections to the planet behind. I don't mind space exploration. I think it'd be wonderful to explore space, but not to leave where you're from behind. Not to cut off your ties to the planet you're born on, to the Mother Earth. And that's something we need to understand. Mother Earth is always here for us if we take care of it. But if we don't take care of it, it's not going to take care of us. We're going to lose the connection, and we're going to be lost as well. And there's a lot of startling facts today about nature. For instance, I heard something like 95% of mammals on the Earth are humans or their pets and agriculture stock. That's strange. 95% of the mammals are cows, pigs, horses, and so on, and people, and dogs and cats and so on. But that's only about 5% are wild animals, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. We've really taken over the planet in a way that's huge influence, and it's now called the Anthropocene for that reason. We're entering a new era, in a sense. And Anthropocene means this people-dominated, we're affecting the whole planet in a people-dominated way. We need to realize that and then do something about that to make sure we don't misuse our power, misuse our influence on the planet, and to start reconnecting to realize to stay healthy as a civilization, we need to have those connections with the planet we live on, because we're not going to go very far with our moving so rapidly ahead, but losing so much behind. We're not going to survive very long. That's important. It's like a life and death struggle in a way.
Well, if you see, you came out with a very wonderful, effective. I read *Sapiens*. Wherever the humans, *Sapiens* went, they actually finished. Rightly mentioned, the majority of the animals, or what was in the nature, disappeared over a period of time. This is something if the past could tell us a truth, is like how we could handle the future. The quote, human nature needs nature. Without just to build on this is a very good quote, because this is absolute truth. I was watching a documentary wherein somebody who had suffered from chronic depression, and he said that when the therapy which worked is when they went to did gardening together, when they held the Mother Earth, that sort of brought in them with the nature. And I think that is one of the main reasons why we have so many problems today, is that we have just gone away from the nature.
I agree. I think that distance from our natural surroundings, and that's why the work we do is so important, I think, because we work with nature. We try to work with local communities who are more traditional because they have more connection with nature. But they're all losing that too. If we don't act soon, people will not have any connection to nature because they'll be living in cities all the time or living away from nature, destroying nature. And we have to really support indigenous peoples and struggles of the local communities to survive where they are and keep their lifestyle going. When I think about poor fishermen in Thailand or poor fishermen in other parts of the world, we think of them as poor, but in a sense, they're very rich. They have a rich community. They have rich social life, in a sense. Traditions are rich. They could pass down to the future generations wisdom of knowledge, how to survive in nature, how to survive on the planet. And oftentimes we in the modern cities, we don't pass down much to our families. We live so modern, computers we have televisions and so on. But what do we pass on to future generations to survive on the planet? What skills do they have? I think the skills that we're losing from the traditional people and the people living in the villages is really important to continue keeping that and respecting that. That's something I think people don't realize. We're losing that biodiversity of skills. It's in a sense a diversity of living conditions that help people to survive, people to be closer to where they live. That's important to try to get back. The original languages are being lost. We're losing so much as we move forward in this tremendous wave, in a sense, a tsunami of modern development. We're moving so fast that we're unable to hold on to and bring with us some of the very important things that we had in the past. We don't want to lose certain things we do not want to lose. We want to hold on to those and bring them forward with us. And that will make us better people in the future, I think.
When you talk about maps, CBMR program is so important in ensuring a more effective approach to grove restoration, avoiding the serious, failures of past tree plantation methods. Is there something very unique in this, which is so? You spoke about in depth about this, but there is something also which very unique that makes it much more attractive as compared to us, much more effective as compared to other techniques.
Well, for one thing, we work with a more biodiverse restoration process because it's ecologically restoring the mangroves in a fashion that the mangroves can survive better. Now, mangroves in, say, India or Bangladesh or Vietnam might be 30 to 40 varieties of mangroves, but they're planting only one variety in most of these plantation efforts, which means 30 or 40 varieties are not being planted and they're not coming back. We're losing that biodiversity. And oftentimes they plant them in neat rows. They plant them in mudflats. And mudflats themselves are an ecosystem that are important as well. A lot of birds feed in the mudflats, a lot of shellfish use the mudflats. They're very important, but we're losing those to planting mangroves, and mangroves don't belong there. Mudflats are too low in the water level. They are lower tide. So when a tide comes in, the mangroves and the mudflats are underwater too long, and mangroves breathe through the roots. I don't know if you know that, but the root systems of mangroves are breathing above water, or when the tide goes out, they can breathe again. They hold their breath when the tide is up. In a sense, when the tide is high, the mangroves kind of says holding their breath, but they depend on the water to go out. So planting them in mudflats and even planting them in seagrasses, which is really crazy, is happening today, and they're failing. So we decided CBMR is a good approach because we work with nature, work with the natural ecology of mangroves, and we understand that ecology more. We teach classes on this. Dominic Woodhouse and Jim Enright in Thailand and Philippines, they teach classes on mangrove restoration to people all around the world. And they oftentimes will show them pictures of failed mangrove plantations and failed mangrove plantings and say, why does this fail? So the people looking at that picture, they understand better. And they'll take them out to the mangroves in person when we could travel before and take them and show them different things about the mangroves and failures and successes. And then people will learn better. So we need to have that kind of contact with those who are involved in this to try to get them away from the old way of doing things, which is not a good way, to do it the right way. And again, working with nature seems to be the right way. So that's what CBMR is unique in that fashion. It's less costly too. It's less cost to this, and it's more long-term. Oftentimes the plantings by hand may work for a short time, but mangroves that restore themselves naturally are more likely to survive changes in weather, changes in wave action, and so on, more resilient. That's the problem. We want to build in resiliency into our systems. That's very important. Whatever you're doing in life, be more resilient, have more chance to move with the things that change in your life. And we need to do that for the mangroves too. So if you have only a monogamous, one type of monoculture forest, that doesn't work very well if there's changes in weather or changes in salinity. And that can change the success of your monoculture. It will die off if it's too saline or too dry and so on. Whereas a more diverse forest will survive. Some of those trees will survive and they'll modify their conditions to survive. But if you have one tree only, it's just like putting all of your eggs in one basket.
Yeah, diversification. Yeah. I think over a period of natural selection, you know much better which is more adaptable to survive. That also is a huge factor which should come in. Yeah. Now, before I come into your vision, I wanted to also, you talked about there is a way you can quantify the benefits of mangroves, put a pricing, or there are some sort of carbon positives which you spoke about. Could you would like to elaborate a bit on this? What sort of methodology or what sort of analysis goes into this particular technique?
Well, for years, people knew that when mangroves were healthy, there'd be more fish. So the local people catch fish. There's more protection against storms. We see that evident in the past. So the valuation of those kinds of benefits was never very high. It was very low until the tsunami hit. After the tsunami hit, mangroves went from $700 or so a hectare to $30,000 a hectare because of the value of protecting the coast and the billions of dollars and millions of dollars lost to destruction from these waves or winds and so on. So people started realizing, wait a minute, this mangrove is very important. To give you a funny example of the importance of mangroves, in Vietnam, when I visited the coast area, they had shrimp farms built. They tore down their mangroves and they built a seawall to protect the shrimp farms from the storms. But the seawall kept breaking down. The waves came over and crashed, and the seawall was cracking. And so they decided to plant mangroves in front of the seawall to protect the seawall and protect the farms. I saw that also in Malaysia, in Penang. They built a seawall in Malaysia, and again, the mangroves were put in front of the seawall to protect the seawall after tearing down their mangroves. So why are people learning so hard? The lessons shouldn't be that hard to learn. Mangroves are a living buffer. They're resilient. They can bend with the waves and the wind. They actually, I think a half-kilometer width of mangroves can reduce a wave by about 80 to 90%. The strength of that wave will be reduced by that kind of distance the mangroves can serve as a buffer. And this is important to understand. The seawalls, the concrete buffers are not working very well. They break down after time. And so we have to keep replacing them and rebuilding them. But a mangrove can just be planted once into a healthy mangrove and keep it alive. It'll protect the coastlines. So this is some of the benefits we can see. And quantification of these benefits, like I say, over the years from 1992 to now, there's a huge difference in the valuation of mangrove from that time till now. And there's scientists who have been studying this for many years who've been involved in evaluation. And they always struggled in the past trying to show that the importance of mangroves for buffers or for other factors for people locally and so on. They tried to show that, but they could never get a good quantity of dollars to show this is worth that much. But in many ways, mangroves are worth much more than the dollars can ever be able to attribute. I mean, loss of life, how do you value that? Yeah. Loss of cultures, loss of safety from a potential for future hurricanes and so on. How do you value that? It's just important to keep them there. It's again losing touch with their earth, losing touch with your roots. In a sense, that's the kind of uniqueness about mangroves for me. It's like the mangroves are the roots of the sea. I met a fisherman in Thailand who actually inspired MAP to form in the first place. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but mangroves were actually unknown to me. And during my writing career as a photojournalist, which is very short, I had a quote from the fisherman because he was talking to my friend Ian, and Ian was translating for me, and I was taking notes for my article. And I turned to Ian because the fisherman, his voice changed. He got really emotional, and all of a sudden, from a very monologue type of talking about the importance of fish for the local village, and he was the headman of the village in Thailand. And so he's talking about this kind of monotone voice, But all of a sudden, it went up in height and strength, real passionate. I said, "What did he say?" Whatever he said seems very important. And Ian said, "This is what he said." He said, "If we have no mangroves, the sea will have no meaning. It's like having a tree without roots, for the mangroves are the roots of the sea." Now, I've used that quote over the years. It inspired me to form MAP with Ian and Pasit Charnstoff from Thailand. The three of us formed it. But that was the inspiration for me to get involved there. Because when he said that, I realized I have to get back to my activism. And I wrote articles about mangroves from then on. So I became an activist and formed MAP at that point with Ian and Pasit. And so the three of us. But the thing is, that quote was so powerful to me because what he said means so much. And I think that's important for us to understand. The local people do know the importance of mangroves. They do know the importance of the planet we live on. We need to support that and support the traditional and indigenous people for those reasons, because they have a lot to offer us as far as knowledge and connection to the planet.
Yeah, that's very poignant, very, very intense. I mean, you cannot quantify it in any way. And I'm sure that a lot of work is being done. Talk about, very passionately, you talk mangroves and biodiversity. What is your vision going forward? What you would like to see 10 years down the line, or even in a more longer run? You want the world, you're very passionate in the whole world. So yeah, biodiversity is so important. A lot of countries are, for example, Singapore 2030 plan. They're putting parks in within, I think, 5 to 10 minutes of walking. So there are fantastic ideas coming around the world. What would you like to see if given a choice?
Well, personally, I would like to see an end to mangrove loss if we can make that happen, because they're still being lost at an extreme bad rate. They're still losing a lot of our mangroves. And the mangroves that are being restored oftentimes are restored badly. So they claim are increasing the mangrove area, but it's actually degraded mangroves are not very healthy. And so I want to see us really work to create a healthy coastal wetland again, respecting the mangroves and the biodiversity they support, but respecting the local communities. That would be my idea of success, in a sense, to stop further loss and to restore what was lost, at least part of what was lost, if we can, back to health. That would be important. And then to see the mangrove as one of the components of our planet that we need to, respect and restore and live in harmony with. We have to learn to live in harmony with the planet. So that would be one of my goals, is to try to, for the mangrove issue itself, to try to see the mangroves restored and conserved in a positive way, and get the local people involved in that process, where they're given the rights to help manage and give them some tenure rights to do that. And also to stop further degradation of these beautiful forest lands by industries like shrimp farming or palm oil developments. It's just not right. And we need those trees more than we need palm oil at this point, more than we need the shrimp farms to export their products to the wealthy nations. We really need to respect the planet, respect the people on it. Yeah. That's pretty much my vision.
And what sort of intervention do you think putting up videos in the kindergarten schools, or K-12, that's when we start very young? Some of the interventions in schools or education or curriculum could be revised in order to make sure that by the time you're in youth, you have a foundation on ideology, particularly in this regard.
Yes, it's very important to talk with the younger generation and work with them. We have what's called a mangrove art contest for children. And that's every year we do that. My wife, Monica, she does that and organizes that for the last 20 years. We get artwork from around the world. And they produce a calendar, which I have here. It's a beautiful calendar with artwork from everywhere. This is the 2021 calendar. It has different artwork from around the world here, from different countries. We're trying to work with kids. We have a curriculum too. I should mention the Mangrove Curriculum that Martin Keeley designed for us. And he lives at the Cayman Islands. The curriculum actually is being used in about 16 countries now. We're working right now on a mini curriculum. This is more pictures here. It's beautiful artwork. And so we're trying to get with the local people to understand better the mangroves and the importance of them, but also work with the younger generation to try to come up with their knowledge and their ability to see the benefits of mangroves. We want to help them understand what's going on. So these kinds of diagrams, sometimes they're just pictures that kids do, very simple, but oftentimes they express a lot of the local culture, which I think is very important. People that do this, they express the culture that they live under. And so it helps the people locally. And they can talk to their parents then and get the parents interested in mangroves too. So we're trying to spread the word. And just recently, I've started working in Florida and Texas and Louisiana in the U.S., trying to get the mangroves in the U.S. protected more, and people in the U.S. better understanding them too. So we work worldwide, and we're trying to do as much as we can. With COVID, it's been hard because there's so much we can't do remotely, but we would love to be able to visit more in person and be able to take people to the mangroves and show them how best to manage them better. So we're hoping they have that ability to soon again, be able to travel to the mangrove areas and talk to the people locally.
Yeah. Now, as a last question from the middle, do share any aha moment with the audience, any experience you cherish, and any message you want to give to the younger generation. You did speak about, and if you think there's any skill set which people should develop to be in this industry, and it could be in engineering, it could be in public policy, it could be in a different kind, what sort of technical skill sets is required if you want to, as in international development, if you want to focus on?
I think people that study environment could be very important to better understand the environment and teach other people about the environment. how to better manage it. We need coastal managers, that can really plan long-term in the future and better process the information that they have and not forget skills that they have as far as managing the resource. Oftentimes in the past, local communities manage the resource sustainably. That's something very important to get back again. So I think sustainable management is very important. So those kinds of skills, just empathy for the environment, empathy for other life forms on the planet is very important. So that's really a good skill to develop as well. And to realize, again, that human nature needs nature. We just need to come with that realization. We need nature. We can't live remote from our connection to the planet. What feeds us, that gives us water, gives us air. We need that planet to survive. It's our life system. So I think skills that work on better understanding how we can survive with the planet rather than without it. Not to go to Mars, we go to Mars if we want to, but not to leave the Earth a dead planet. Go to Mars with a healthy planet when we leave. And that way you're not just leaving something behind that's not going to survive. We want to survive. That's important. And I think it's important for young people to feel they have a power to do something about these issues too. So try to empower the young generation. They're the ones, the future decision makers. We want to empower them with knowledge and with skills to be able to do that management. So that's what I hope will happen.
And any aha moment, do you think, which brings back a smile? Anything, and you really cherish?
I mentioned to you the man in Thailand when he mentioned that quote. It's so powerful for me just to hear him because he was speaking in a monotone and all of a sudden he changed his voice. That was an aha moment, if you want to call it that. I realized that he had something to say that was beyond just a simple fisherman. And he knew so much more as a simple fisherman than he would as a scientist who was studying. I was at a conference in Brazil, and the conference was talking about, one of the themes was working with local communities to conserve the mangroves. And that was back in 2000, I think it was. And I looked around me and there was no local community members there. It was all scientists and students. And I stood up and said, I will not come to another conference like this unless you have local communities here. And the scientist turned to me from India. He turned to me and said, do you think they'd understand each other, the scientists and the communities? I said, we have to learn to understand each other. We really do need to learn that because that's something we just assume that local communities are ignorant. And they're not ignorant. They have a lot of knowledge. And I think people need to know that. The scientists are learning a lot of things from local communities about medicines, about uses of mangroves they never knew before. Oftentimes, local communities have names for all the local plants that are beyond the science names, and they know more of the local wildlife and so on than most people know. So we have to respect that kind of knowledge and understand that they hold the key in many ways. And we need to not assume that they don't hold any value. But they hold a lot of value. We have to respect that. And then we have to, like I say, reconnect. And there are, in a sense, our means for reconnecting if we can talk with them and deal with them in a respectful way.
Yes. Even Mayan civilization, it was totally nature, pure agriculture. It was one of the foremost civilizations in the world. And it was all about nature-based solutions. They knew a lot more about what we know in many aspects and all lot of things. Yeah. True. People who have lived with nature, we really don't know. We think that science knows more, but they know a lot of things, how to work with nature. I think they are, I would say scientists, natural scientists in terms of understanding. They have been able to adopt and move ahead in life, still.
Yeah.
That's true.
I agree.
Thank you for, sharing time and, chatting about your work. About Mangrove Action Project. It's doing a fabulous job around the world. There are a lot of countries, and like you talked about art, and you talked about a lot of other projects. I actually recently played a video, the curriculum which you're talking about for children. Really amazing. Sincerely appreciate your value add on this subject, and I really wish you forward the best way forward. And I hope the Middle Road could be a part of the vision and can promote your mission of them. Thanks.
It's good talking with you.